Election Watch 2013. I'm your host, Teresa Wippel, and today we are talking with Edmonds City Council member Strom Peterson, who is running for re-election to position 2. Did I get that right?
That is correct, yep.
I had to check because, you know, we've been talking. I've sometimes had that problem. So, Strom, if you could tell us first a little bit about yourself, your background, and why you are running for re-election.
Sure, absolutely. As many people know, I'm a business owner in downtown Edmonds. I have the Cheesemonger's Table. I've had a business in Edmonds since we moved here in 2001. So that's how I first got involved in just the city in general, as you know, being kind of a citizen and somebody who's kind of staking their claim to Edmonds and wants to make a living here in the city. And so that's how I got involved in politics locally. It was part of my childhood, really, being around politics. My grandfather was a county commissioner in southern Colorado. Both of my parents were active in politics in New Mexico. So political discussions and the idea of public service was just part of dinner conversation every night since I was a little kid. So it seemed to me a logical step that if you want to impart some change or just be involved, that's an excellent way to do it. So I've been actively involved in Edmonds politics for some years now, was appointed to the council, and then ran for election and won. And you know, want to run again because I think there are so many opportunities for Edmonds and so many things that I'm concerned about. Opportunities are, you know, a lot of great economic opportunities with downtown, with Five Corners, Westgate, 99 to really help us come out of this economy and turn things around. And then things that I'm concerned about, environmentally especially. Whether it's the coal trains, our water quality, air quality, it's things like that that really kind of keep me motivated to be a part of the council.
And as somebody who actually owns a business in town, which is a little bit unique for people on the council, right? Well, we don't need to go through that. But nonetheless, it does put you in kind of a unique position to see things. Let's jump to a question about economic development. Do you think that there are things that Edmonds should be doing more aggressively in terms of economic development, or ways to kind of stimulate that more, areas of town maybe where we're not doing that as well as we should?
I think there are always a lot of things. There are very few big things. I think that's one trap that we'll fall into, is look for that big answer. And there isn't a big answer. There are a lot of little tiny answers. So we have a great team with the city staff right now. We have a great chamber. We have an active downtown Edmonds Merchants Association that are really doing a good job going out and recruiting businesses. I think from the city's perspective, we've improved tremendously over the last years when it comes to ease of permitting, when it comes to attracting some of these businesses. You know, we've had a couple of great successes. Obviously, Dick's Drive-In was kind of the feather in the cap of Stephen Clifton with the city. But one thing that they said after the process was over was how great it was to work with the city. The permit process, from, you know, the stormwater retention that they had to do through the building permits, everything they said was just incredibly smooth. The folks at Panera Bread said the same thing. So we've made some significant changes, I think, in the last few years, just attitude and ease. So if we can kind of market that idea, that's going to be a big part of it, to let other businesses know that Edmonds is ready to help you open a successful business. And then some of the other things are just supporting the businesses that we have, you know, and that's part of that is groups like the Chamber's responsibility, and business owners like myself, our responsibility to let people know the importance of buying locally. The city has also been a great help with that, just getting the word out on what it means for people in Edmonds to spend their money in Edmonds and how much more of that money stays in the community.
Okay, yeah. What do you think is the most important issue facing Edmonds right now?
Whew. You know, it always boils down to the economy, but that kind of fractures into so many different things. You know, we've cut our police force because we don't have money. We've cut, you know, staff for permitting, as I was just talking about, because we don't have enough money. So it always bases around the economy and what we can do as citizens to try to build up our tax revenue. We're in a tough spot in this state just because we're so reliant on property taxes and sales tax. So at some point here in the next few years, we're going to have a serious conversation about levy lid lifts and et cetera. I'm glad to see that at least the economy is looking a little bit better. We're having some successes, I think, due to the budget cuts that we have been making. that we're in better shape than many cities, but that's always the underlying pressure. And then, we can look at a lot of other issues that come from that. Like I said, public safety is, of course, always number one. We've seen a pretty dramatic increase in especially kind of big headline grabbing crimes, and that's something that's, scares me. I think scares a lot of people, and that we really need to pay attention to.
And along those lines, the issue of, oh man, I knew I was just going to lose my train of thought there. Related to, well, let's just move on to the next thing, because the train of thought is gone and it'll come back. Let's talk a little bit about Harbor Square.
Sure.
And the fact that the council is now kind of trying to decide next steps with the Port of Edmonds, the plan that the Port of Edmonds proposed and then withdrew to incorporate the Harbor Square into the master plan, into the city's comprehensive plan. What do you think the next best steps are? I mean, I know that the council's going to go through a decision tree process and figure out kind of, at least that was my understanding, that's where you were.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then kind of decide maybe what the staff recommendations look like and what might need to happen. Mm-hmm. But after that, do you have any sense of what the next best thing is to do with it, given the kind of the complications and the amount of time it's taken to kind of get to here? Yeah,
that is a tough question. Because kind of where do you go from here? We have to me, such a great opportunity in the Harbor Square area. We have the Edmonds Marsh, of course, which we've had great success in getting some grants to clean that up, and people are just really starting to realize what we have down there. I think that's been kind of a quiet, kind of thing that nobody really cared about or knew much about for a lot of years. A lot of people have been working on it, but for the most part, it hasn't been on the kind of the headlines. Mm-hmm. And that's changing. And so we have to look at the opportunity at Harbor Square to not only enhance the marsh and help clean it up, but to really showcase it. Because one of the economic drivers that we could touch on, a couple questions ago is tourism. And I remember a few years ago when the economic development director at the time brought in the Edmonds Bird Fest as a business owner, and I may have been on the council at the time. I was like, it didn't seem like that was going to be a big deal. Well, I was wrong and readily admit it. The Bird Fest,
their birds.
Yep, brings a lot of people. People come in and they spend money. They stay at the hotels. They eat at the restaurants, and they talk to their friends about what a great time they had in Edmonds. So I think we need to try to take a step back, look at the opportunities that we have at Harbor Square. From an environmental perspective, especially with the marsh and what we can do and what that will mean to salmon habitat and what that will mean to people that like to fish and people that like to just recreate in the water. And I think we also need to look at some of the transportation opportunities that we have down here with the trains, with the buses, with the ferry, of course. We have a great opportunity, I think, to kind of connect those three and create some great opportunities for living situations, whether it's live-work situations that we can build or something where we can take advantage of that commuting traffic, get a few people off the roads that don't want to have to drive down to Seattle, that can jump on the train or can, kind of commute back and forth on the ferry. So if we can look at that, try to think of it as an opportunity instead of getting caught up in real specifics about, well, what height are you talking about? No, what height are you talking about? I think if we can start, I hate to say on a more philosophical bent, but at least come to an understanding that this is an area of town that could really benefit with kind of some big thinking.
So do you favor continuing to look at it from the council's perspective as maybe starting with a council plan, or just scrapping what's there and starting from scratch?
I really don't want to start from scratch. I think that the work that the port has done, the work that citizens that have been involved with that have done over, at least 3 years now, I think just to kind of throw all of that out, I don't think is a good service, not only for the amount of money that the port had to spend, but just the amount of effort that went through, and again, not only with the Port Commission and those elected officials and their staff, but with the citizens that were involved. So I think there were some great ideas, and I think we were think we were working on that process when I think we kind of got tripped up. We took some great ideas and said yes, and took some ideas that we thought may have gone a bit too far and said no. And I'm willing to give it a little bit more time. At some point, if the council really can't come together, then we might just have to at least stop and take a breath and maybe wait for 6 months or for a year and just let the dust settle and let everybody, rethink some of these kind of priorities and make another run at it. But I would hate to kind of ignore everything that's been done, at least, and that's why I like this process where we're going to kind of do this decision tree. So if we do have to come back to it in a year, we'll have, I think, a better document to start with. It's like, okay, we don't have to start from scratch, but we can start from, square 2 or 3 or wherever it is.
Okay. And you mentioned a word that has come up in a few other interviews, and that is heights. And the only reason I ask it is because it seems to be a part of everyday conversation in Edmonds, and people make fun of us about it. For whatever reason, some people get it, some people don't. But I guess as somebody who's in a position where your constituents watch the use of that word very closely, and probably everybody voting in this election, some of them may have strong feelings, although I'm never quite sure how many really care, but I think there are certainly a core group of people who care.
Sure.
So how do you address that as you're going through, as somebody who's sitting there and thinking about those things? How do you address that when you talk to people about what that means? Like, you look at this Port of Edmonds proposal, and as soon as people started talking about going up some feet above what people are used to, it set off alarms. And every
Right.
single proposal in town, if there's any mention of anything that goes above that minimum, it sets off alarms. As somebody who is kind of looking at ways to move the city forward economically, and knowing that some people say that you sometimes have to give a little to give some projects some space if they may need to go up a little bit, how do you, in your mind, kind of explain that to people? And I'm not asking you to come out and say you're for 20-story buildings. I'm just saying, how do you, because I'm curious. I mean,
Sure.
I think that's got to be a tough, I would say, as anybody who runs for office in Edmonds, you're always in the spotlight on the height issue.
Right, and it is tough, and it is the hot button issue. I think what we have to work on with this issue is, where is the balance and what's the trade-off? I mean, we don't want tall big box buildings, but I don't think anybody wants a short big box building either. So how do we incorporate open space, the things that people want: wider sidewalks, more green space, environmentally sensitive buildings, things that most people that I talk to, when you start going down that road, it's like, oh yeah, that's exactly what I want. I would love to have a little pocket park. I would love to have some wider sidewalks. I would love it if that building was a gold LEED platinum building with solar panels so we can reduce our carbon footprint. I would love it if there was some, more affordable housing for my mom to downsize from her single family home and be able to still live in Edmonds and maybe in an apartment. When you have those conversations, people nod their head, but unfortunately sometimes when you say, well, then what if we went up 3 more feet or 5 more feet, and then it's the reaction. So it's really trying to figure out what people do want and what that means kind of economically as well. I mean, we can talk about, what that brings to the city from a tax revenue basis. To me, that's not really the selling point. What's really is how you create a community. And I think if we have new buildings going up, we don't have a whole lot of opportunity for it, but there are some. And if we create new buildings that a community can be proud of, because it offers all of these amenities to the public, again, open space and these kind of things that create gathering spaces for people to, the Hazel Miller Plaza is a great example. Then suddenly the conversation changes as to what are we going to get. And I think the conversation has been kind of dominated by, well, what are they giving to the developers? And I think we just need to flip that around. It's like, no, it's not what we're giving to the developers. It's what are the developers going to give to the community? And I think if we can start having that conversation, I think it makes a little bit more sense.
Okay. That'll be interesting to see how that all plays out.
Mm-hmm.
Now I remember what I was going to ask you before, and that is we were on the subject of levies and tax, kind of budget problems and where we go from there, and of course the infrastructure issues that we have and the streets that
Right.
haven't been fixed in a long time and the water and sewer lines that are falling apart and all that. What do you think are maybe what the council will be looking at over time? Do you think you might go back to looking at a levy again at some point? Now, we didn't get it passed last time, but is that an option that might be on the table?
Oh, it has to be.
Okay.
Yeah, it has to be an option here within the next couple of years. I think having some discussion with city staff, with people in other cities that have had successes and failures, looking at our own failures in the last few years, it takes a lot more work than people think. I mean, who wants to raise their taxes? I don't, and I'm pretty progressive and kind of believe in that whole idea, but you want to make sure that people are confident that their tax monies are going to be used well. And I think over the last few years, I think the budgets that we've passed, I think especially this last budget that Mayor Erling passed was a tough budget. There were some harsh cuts, but I think people are responding to it. People in the city are like, okay, they're proving that they are, trimming the fat, and I think that's been done for years. I think Mayor Hawkinson did that for a lot of years. And now we're starting to get to that point where we can't anymore, and it's really been obvious with roads. I think that's the telltale. That's really about the number one issue that people talk to me about. Or, well, what about the roads? What about the roads? There are some small fixes that we can do. I think we can look at our real estate excise taxes and move more of those monies to road repair than parks. But that's tough because then that kind of leaves parks in the lurch. It's a bit of a juggling match, but our roads are getting to that point, as you know, that they get so bad and then it's kind of falling off a cliff, and it gets exponentially more expensive to fix them. So we need to have a serious conversation about that. We need to work on Olympia. Work with our people down there. We've got great representation down there that are all for transportation packages, but we didn't get a transportation package out of Olympia. And some of that, at least some of the ideas, were to give city governments and county governments a little more flexibility in how they might be able to spend money and raise money, but we didn't get that. So we're really stuck, especially smaller municipalities. So there are a lot of pieces to put together for that. And that's kind of one of the reasons that I'm running again, because I think that's a real key to making a good, livable city.
Mm-hmm. And some of that transportation package actually designated for Highway 99. Was that part of that money that we were talking about? I thought I remember there was a chunk.
There were a few. We got some of the money from Highway 99 through the capital campaign, mm-hmm. But some of that ongoing funding, and again, that flexibility that a lot of cities were looking for, whether it's through our, through vehicles or through different ways that we might be able to specifically allocate money for roads, that just is just stalled.
Okay. So this is a question that I know is going to come up because it keeps continuing to be in the news. It won't go away, and that is the issue of the animal roaming ordinance and the fact that, we now have included cats in the list of animals that cannot roam anymore, or owners could be fined if neighbors complain. Right. I just think it's good to, I've asked everybody else, so I have to ask you too. You were supportive of this,
right.
And most people were, but there have been some, just on TV last night, in fact, there was a whole other story with there were some people talking about why they thought it was a silly idea.
Right.
So tell me why it's not a silly idea for those cat lovers.
I think I got 2 calls from 2 different radio stations this morning, but luckily I was already at work, and I said, no, I don't need that. So, I mean, one thing, it was on the books and has been on the books since 2007. And then and I was council president at the time, I took responsibility for it. When we changed another part of the ordinance, it was almost a kind of a cut and paste mistake that the old language was inserted in. We tried to change it the following week, and that didn't happen. So it became a story again. The thing that I kind of stand behind, my father was a veterinarian. When I was a kid growing up in New Mexico, our animals ran around. I don't deny that, but I also have great respect for organizations like the American Veterinary Association, the ASPCA, the Humane Society. And 201, these organizations that are concerned about the welfare of animals support this kind of legislation. They think it's very important that people take responsibility, that their animals aren't roaming because of death, disease, injury. So that's one of the things that was always in my mind when it came to this. And really, we're not outside of the norm. I think one of my favorite comments on my Edmonds News was somebody wrote, "Well, I guess that's why I live in Linwood." And the response was, "Well, then you must support it because Linwood has the same ordinance." And I was like, well, there you go. It didn't make the news in Linwood when they passed it. Right. So why it doesn't Edmonds, I don't know. I do. It was when it first came up a few years ago. It was a very emotional issue with a few people. Right. So I'm hoping, I think, as everybody, that we're not out of the ordinary here. This is something that's happened not only all over the state, but really all over the country. And it's really about protecting animals. It's about property rights as well. But to me, it really boiled down that we should be responsible pet owners. This is one way to talk about that issue and let people know.
Okay, all right. We won't talk about cats anymore. We're done. Some critics have said that the city council does too much micromanagement of city affairs and city staff. Do you think that's a fair assessment?
It's the devil's, well, especially with micromanaging, I guess the devil's in the details. I am one where I really believe that there needs to be a separation of powers, that the city council is the legislative body. We come up with policy. The mayor directs his staff to enact that policy. So I do believe that there are times where the city council oversteps its bounds. I can't think of a specific instance, but we're a young council. I'm the longest, at least continuing serving member with 5 years, so that's always an interesting place to be, because there's a lot to learn. I was pretty quiet for the first couple of years on council. I remember one citizen actually asked me once, he said, "You just don't say anything." And I finally said, "Well, that's because I really don't know anything yet. I'm learning." And that's a big part of it. I mean, you go in as a new council member, you're enthusiastic, you want to get things done, and sometimes, you think, we have such a talented staff that's who you go to. But at some point, if the staff is getting direction from 7 different council members and their boss, they listen to the boss, I know, but they have to pick up the phone for the other 7. So I think that is an issue. Not this past council retreat, but the retreat before that, brought in a consultant to talk about kind of the separation of powers. I think that helped. I think occasionally we need reminded of that. But I know can be a point of frustration with the staff, and it can be with me, because I think we need to look at broader policy goals instead of really trying to get down into the details.
Right. We had an interesting interview with a candidate for a city council position in a different city, and he said something that it just kind of took me by surprise, but I think I would love your take on it. He said the problem with this other city council was that they agree on everything and they don't argue and there's no dissension, and he thinks that's wrong because it means different viewpoints aren't being represented in terms of the citizens. And I think sometimes the Edmonds City Council gets criticized because you guys seem to be fighting all the time. I'm not saying all the time, but it seems
right.
like there can be a fair amount of dissension. So is there some middle ground there in terms of where you need to, kind of present a united front, but also need to be representing viewpoints?
Oh, absolutely. And I can see that. If you have 7 people thinking the same way, you're not going to find that outside point of view. Or if you only have one, then it can be too easy to quash. I think actually Deanna Dawson, I remember her saying, whose position I took over. She said, if everybody walks away from the table unhappy, you've probably created some good legislation. So if everybody has to give something, nobody's like, oh, that's not really how I wanted that to happen, then you've probably figured something out. But, you know, I think 4-3 votes are fine, and 5-2 votes. And, you know, they're, sure, I want the stuff that I want to introduce. I'd love it to be 7-0, but that's not always going to happen. So I think the real key is that if you're on the losing side, 4-3 or whatever it is, that you just accept that and move on, and you pick the next thing and you don't hang on to that. I think that, and I don't even think that's happened so much in Edmonds, where there's that kind of bitterness. And it's like, oh, well, I'm not going to vote for your thing next week just because you didn't vote. But obviously that happens in politics. Luckily, I don't think that's happened in Edmonds, but yeah, I kind of, you know, I think good dialogue, I think that's the way to go. 7-0 can be a little boring.
Well, it certainly makes for more interesting reading of stories.
That's
when
right.
There's debate. It's really boring when you guys all get
Yeah.
along, actually.
Meetings would be a little shorter.
Exactly. So, a question about the city's reserve fund for litigation. It's now at $15,000, is less than 1/3 of what the target was when it was set up a year ago. Do you think that should be replenished before you look at other uses for that fund?
I do, yeah. You know, it's the city does a lot of stuff, and there's always a chance for litigation, whether it's a big public works project, or it's a traffic accident with a public works vehicle or a police officer. So there's just we have 200 and something employees and however many hundreds linear feet or miles of road as Phil Williams has talked about. Those are all areas of liability. So I think as good stewards of the economy, you need to make sure that you can cover those important issues.
Right. Okay. So what do you think is Edmonds' greatest strength and its greatest weakness? Greatest strength,
and I know this is going to be horribly cliched, but I mean the greatest strength really are the voters of Edmonds. I mean every year maybe there's one town that beats us, but they only have a few hundred people. But we have a 60% voter turnout in city council elections and off-year elections. I mean that's remarkable. So they're educated, they're interested, they get to the polls, and they certainly let us know. So that's a great asset to have. Kind of like with the 7-0 vote, how boring it would be to be, I think, on a city council if you were in a city that didn't really care. And you could say crazy things and nobody would even pay attention. I mean, the number of people that watch the city council meetings always amazes me, that they watch it and they let you know. So I think that's a great asset. Physically, we have Puget Sound, and that's really the asset that we need to cherish and protect and do whatever we can to make better. So that's one of the things that drives me, is to be able to look out at the water, and it looks pristine and beautiful on the surface, but everybody knows that we've got a lot of work to make sure that we clean that up and that we save that for generations to come.
Mm-hmm. So is there a weakness? And if we don't have one, it's okay.
Right. I think our weakness is, I think sometimes we have such a fantastic city, we have such a beautiful location, that it's really easy to lull ourselves into a false sense of security, mm-hmm. until suddenly we look and we're like, why are these roads so horrible? Right. Or why aren't there more police officers on the street? And it's because we've kind of, and I think with some very strong administrations and just great city staff, that they've been able to kind of keep things going over the last really 8 or 10 years with tighter and tighter budgets. And most of Edmonds hasn't realized that. And that's kudos to the staff for pulling that off. But I think that's the one thing that the citizens need to kind of be aware of. It's like, we're getting to the point now where your services will be affected, whether it's, a call time for an EMT or a call time for a police officer, or just that kind of bone-jarring pothole that you're going to hit on the way home from work.
Right. Okay. So we've come to the point where we're just about at the end, and so it's now your turn to tell people when they see your name on the ballot in November or before November, what you want them to remember about you and why they should vote for you.
Right. I've got a few things that I'm passionate about. One is just the business climate of Edmonds, but the people that I've met owning a business that live here locally, that have put their blood, sweat, and tears into a small business, and really care about the community. That's the point of view I like to bring to the council, and something that I think is really important, and that people in Edmonds and people from outside of Edmonds really appreciate when they come down and they talk to somebody behind a counter and they find out that that's the owner, and how the owner is talking up their city and talking up their neighbors and their other businesses, and in all the neighborhoods of Edmonds. And I think that's something that's really important, that I've been really fortunate to kind of prosper in my years here in business. Number two is my just absolute commitment to the environment. I think we have some scary things coming. I think coal trains are a big issue that we have to take on, and I've been proud to stand with members of the different tribes and Mayor McGinn from Seattle and a lot of different cities around the state to try to say no to coal trains, and we're making headway. And then really looking at things like Puget Sound and taking a moment to look out at that water, look out at the marsh, and realize that as beautiful as it is, we have a lot of work to do to protect that. And I think those go hand in hand. I think a prosperous business community that cares about the city that they live in will put in the effort to stand up to coal trains, will put in the effort to give money to help rehab and understand the need for stormwater mitigation and all of those kind of things that cost money. So it's a way of bringing business community and the environmental community together. Edmonds is doing a great job of that. I think we can be a real leader and have been. So those are the things that keep me going and make me
Okay.
ready for November and knocking on some doors.
Very good. And you have a website?
We do. Yep. Votestrom.com.
Okay, that's easy to remember.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for stopping by, and I wish you the best of luck.
All right, Teresa. Thank you.
Thanks.